Today we are going to be talking about the Kalam Cosmological Argument, the KCA, for the existence of God. I think a lot of people leave that part out, but that's actually the complete name of it. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the KCA as it relates to the proposed monotheistic God of Abraham, because those are typically the proponents of it. And we're going to talk about where it came from, what it actually is, whether or not it makes sense as an argument for God, and some of the supplemental arguments that go along with the KCA and all of that good stuff. James Fodor is a graduate student of both neuroscience and general philosophy, and he's the host of a long-running podcast called The Science of Everything. He's also an author of a philosophical blog called The Godless Theist, very interesting title. And he talks about philosophy and science and religion and pretty much all the stuff we like to talk about here. So, James, welcome to Secular Soapbox.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be along. Thanks for inviting me. Yeah.
You have a kind of a history of discussing cosmological arguments, and you've discussed the Kalam before. I noticed from some of the videos on your YouTube channel. How did you get into that? Is that an argument that you just found fascinating to talk about, or did someone confront you with that once?
I think my interest in the Kalam mainly stemmed out of my the book that I wrote. I'm not sure if you mentioned that. I might just show that here.
Yes, please do.
Yes.
So this is my book, Unreasonable Faith, where I discuss the arguments put forward by Christian apologist William Lane Craig. Mm-hmm. And my interest in Kalam kind of stems from my interest in Craig, which in turn stemmed from my I guess discussions that I had with various Christians that I came into contact with, and recommending him or just seeing his debates on YouTube or wherever else. And I found his style of presentation very structured and I guess confrontive, not combative necessarily, but I mean intellectually challenging, I guess is the way to put it. And I particularly was interested, I think, in his argument for the resurrection of Jesus, because this is an argument that many Christians will bring up when you talk to them about reasons for, or at least some of those who are more interested in the apologetic side of things. Mm-hmm. So what I actually started doing was compiling some sort of thoughts and writings and research on the resurrection argument. And so I thought, well, maybe I could expand on some of the stuff that I've written and do a full response to William Lane Craig's apologetic, because no one's actually done that before, as a book length response to his systematic apologetic. So, of course, the two main arguments that he's published the most on, one is the resurrection, and the first one, though, where he did his first PhD, was the Kalam Cosmological Argument. So naturally, that would have to be a significant focus of the book. So that was sort of how I got into doing a in-depth analysis of his arguments and the science and philosophy of that.
So for context here, and this is probably important to mention, you are obviously not a proponent of that argument. You disagree with it. How would you categorize your religious perspective? Do you identify as an atheist, or what would you call yourself?
Yeah, so I was raised as a Mormon, and I left that when I was about 20. And for those who may not know, so Mormonism is a non-standard, non-Trinitarian variant of Christianity, although I know various Christians disagree that it is, but I think that they're wrong about that. But it is a sort of a non-standard form. Anyway, so I left that when I was about 20 and sort of lost my faith then, and so now I call myself an atheist.
Okay. And so as an atheist, you saw William Lane Craig's argument, realized it didn't have any well-known response to it, at least not one that was book length, and you were kind of inspired to address it, so to speak. So do I have that about right?
So there were responses in the literature to different aspects of Craig's arguments, such as the Kalam and his argument for the resurrection in particular. Mm-hmm. But no one, and to my knowledge still there haven't been any other book-length responses to his apologetic as a whole. So like all of his apologetic arguments. He also has work in theology, which I don't consider so much, but his apologetic stuff, I tried to give a systematic response and critical analysis of that from, I guess, a naturalist's perspective.
Well, thank you for doing that much. I've actually bought William Lane Craig's Reasonable Faith and the study guide that comes with it for a friend of mine. And now that I know that there's a book on Reasonable Faith that directly contradicts that, I think I might get that for just to complete the set. I had to, like you said, there is no other version of that out there in that format.
Yeah,
which
so
is
that's
kind of hard to believe to me, actually. Until you just said it, I never would have thought of that. As old as the argument is, or as frequently as it's brought up, you would think that someone would have composed a response to it by now, at least one that a formal response, kind of in the way that you did. So I was surprised to hear that.
Well, again, there are responses published in the academic literature with respect to the Kalam and some of the other stuff that Craig has discussed. Most of what he's published in the philosophical literature relates to philosophical defenses of the of causal finitism, so the idea that there must be a finite beginning to the universe, as well as his defense of presentism, which is a philosophy of time. One thing that he has not been pulled up on, and I believe I'm the first one to make in my book, I'm, as far as I know, the first one to make this explicit criticism, that I believe his philosophy of time that he thinks is important for defending the Kalam, we can get into that in a moment, is inconsistent, or at least very hard to reconcile with the scientific arguments that he uses to support the Kalam, like the Born-Guth-Lincoln theorem and other of the scientific results that he likes to mention in debates. And I think that it's because no one has systematically looked at all his, or at least all his apologetically relevant philosophical work, that they haven't really noticed these contradictions before, or again, if I'm being charitable, internal tensions, but I would tend to call them contradictions. But anyway, I think that that's the advantage of looking sort of systematically, because what Craig can do is he can, when someone raises an objection or a question, he can give one response, and then later on, or even in a different debate, someone questions something else and he can give another response, and he can do that for lots of things. And that sounds convincing until you realize that some of these responses don't really fit together, and so he sort of can't defend both of those things at the same time.
Right. Wow. But fortunately, we have people like you to notice stuff like that and then write books about them. So
people willing to read enough of his books.
You know what? I have to give credit where credit is due. Caleb is actually the one who came up with this idea to discuss Kalam. And so I have to thank him for kind of putting this idea in my head. It's evolved a few times before we decided on how we were going to discuss it. But that kind of makes me curious. Caleb, why the cosmological argument? You're muted.
I'm sorry about that.
There you go.
Professionalism. No, I chose the Kalam because of late, it's been the conversation that I'm able to go the deepest down the rabbit hole with ideas that I can actually play around with, ideas that don't seem absurd or crazy, and that are very relevant to the atheist-theist conversation. And I try to spend a lot of my time talking with theists, talking about this, because you can wind up talking about all sorts of different topics. Things like he had mentioned, you can go far enough down the rabbit hole to start talking about the nature of time and how that relates to God, and that unto itself is a conversation that could last an afternoon. And the Kalam Cosmological, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to ask, do you find that theists bring this up frequently, or is this because it seems to be something only I've run into a few times, but
I think it's the most intuitive argument in the theist's favor. I think that by our nature, we do sort of have this bias to accept the teleological arguments and the arguments from design and things like that. I think that there is a pretty good just like I said, an inherent drive. It's like in our blood to believe this nonsense. We're very biased in that way. And
you just called it nonsense, so clearly you're biased in that way.
it's true. I am.
We don't know. Maybe there's something to this. Let's dig deeper and figure out what it is we're talking about here.